Because the truth is, most people aren't confused by you. They're overwhelmed by you. They're not misunderstanding you. They're underestimating themselves. When someone's worldview is held together with fragile tape and borrowed confidence, your clarity feels like an earthquake they didn't sign up for. And instead of admitting, wow, this person sees life through a higher lens, they'll act like you're the one talking in riddles, even when you're explaining something as simple as, relax, I said what I said. Here's a psychological fact. The human brain rejects anything that forces it to grow too quickly. That means when you show up with insight, depth, awareness, and a spirit that refuses to shrink, some people's minds literally push back. Not because you're wrong, but because your truth stretches places they've never exercised. And the funniest part? Some of these same people will later take your message, water it down, and repost it on social media like they discovered fire. But this is why being set apart comes with its own kind of humor. The universe will let you watch people pretend not to understand you, only for them to quote you weeks later like it's original research. Meanwhile, you're standing there like, wow, so now my thoughts are trending? When you're chosen, marked, spiritually distinguished, or simply cut from a fabric most people don't have access to, explanations become a luxury you can no longer afford. Your life moves at a velocity they can't track. Your insights hit depths they don't swim in, and your evolution exposes chapters they haven't even opened. You're not meant to explain yourself. You're meant to become the moment that forces people to rethink everything they thought they knew. Not through debate, not through justification, through presence, through essence, through that quiet, undeniable something that makes people whisper about you when you leave the room. So today, we're diving into the reality behind this truth. If you saw how truly set apart you are, you'd never waste another breath explaining yourself. Not out of pride, not out of ego, but because explanations are for equals, and you were never standing among them in the first place. Number 1. If you saw how rare your perspective is, you'd stop explaining to people who only argue from limitation. Most people don't reject your ideas because they're deep, complex, or hard to understand. They reject them because your ideas challenge the limits they've built their entire identity around. When someone has spent years defending the four walls of their comfort zone, anything that expands beyond those walls feels dangerous. They're not debating you because they want clarity. They're debating you because growth terrifies them. They're not confused. They're protecting their boundaries, and not the good kind. The type of boundaries built from fear, insecurity, and a lifetime of settling for good enough. When you speak from a higher perspective, you're speaking from experience, awareness, and maturity that wasn't handed to you. It was earned. Meanwhile, some people talk from places they've never questioned. They inherited their beliefs, picked up their mindset from their environment, and never tested any of it. So when you bring a viewpoint that didn't come from survival mode or imitation, they can't receive it. Your clarity feels like a threat to the reality they've been holding on to like a security blanket. This is why explaining yourself to certain people leaves you feeling drained, unseen, or even slightly annoyed. You're trying to pour ocean water insight into a cup-sized mind that only understands what fits its capacity. The mismatch will always feel like resistance. And here's the wild part. Even when you break things down for them in the simplest way, they still twist it, reject it, or argue with it. Not because you're wrong, but because they don't want to expand. Growth requires effort. Protecting limitation is easier. The rarest thing about you is that you don't speak from ego, competition, or insecurity. You speak from awareness. You speak from pattern recognition. You speak from lessons learned the hard way. Your perspective is shaped by experiences that broke you open, not kept you small. That alone puts you in a different category. Once you truly understand how uncommon your lens is, you stop explaining yourself to people who never intended to understand you in the first place. You conserve your energy. You recognize what conversations are worth your presence. And you finally accept that some people argue from limitation, not from logic, not from truth, and certainly not from wisdom. They're not rejecting your perspective. They're rejecting the growth required to meet you where you are. Number 2. If you saw how many people study you quietly, you'd stop trying to clarify yourself to the loud ones. The loudest people in your life are rarely the ones who truly understand you. They're the ones who react quickly, judge quickly, criticize quickly, and talk the most, all because they can't handle the depth of who you are. But while they make noise on the surface, there are others watching you in silence, taking in everything you do with full attention. These quiet observers don't jump in with opinions or arguments. They watch, they listen, and they learn. They see the value in you long before anyone else admits it. There's something about your presence, your choices, your resilience, or your perspective that pulls people in, even if they never say a word. They don't clap, they don't comment, and they don't announce themselves. But they're paying attention. And the irony is that the loud people, the ones you feel pressured to explain yourself to, are usually the ones who aren't even trying to understand. They're too focused on reacting to truly hear you. Some people study you because your life teaches them things theirs never has. They learn from how you handle pressure, how you stay calm in chaos, how you bounce back after setbacks, and how you carry yourself even when nobody is cheering. They see strength in you that you don't always see in yourself. They see clarity in you that helps them make better decisions in their own lives. And they see authenticity in you that quietly inspires them to level up. But you often don't notice these silent learners because they don't announce their admiration. Instead, you get distracted by the loud ones who misunderstand you, interrupt you, or try to argue their way into being right. They drain your energy while the quiet ones value it. They question your motives while the quiet ones respect your intention. They challenge your identity while the quiet ones grow from it. The truth is, you don't owe explanations to people who only listen to respond. Your voice is not meant to be wasted on those who treat your truth like a debate. Once you realize how many people silently benefit from your existence, you stop trying to convince the ones who choose not to see you. You start speaking for clarity, not approval. You start living for purpose, not validation. And you learn to embrace the quiet impact you're making, the kind that changes lives without ever asking for applause. Number 3. If you saw the spiritual weight your presence carries, you'd understand why people pretend not to understand you. There are people who grasp exactly who you are, but they'll never admit it because acknowledging your depth would force them to acknowledge their own lack of growth. It's not that your words are complicated. It's that your presence carries a kind of truth they're not ready to face. You walk into a room with a grounded energy, a certain awareness, a certain stillness, and it unsettles people who rely on noise, ego, and performance to feel significant. They sense something in you that exposes what's missing in them, so they hide behind confusion as an excuse. Some people pretend not to understand you because understanding you would mean they must respect you. And for some, that's too big of a step. They'd rather downplay your insight than admit you're operating on a level they can't reach yet. They turn your clarity into questions, your confidence into arrogance, and your simplicity into complexity. Not because they don't get it, but because your presence forces an internal confrontation they don't want to have. The truth is, when someone with real spiritual weight speaks, it's not just the words that hit, it's the energy behind them. Your presence carries history, transformation, scars, lessons, and victories you never brag about. People can feel that even if they can't explain it. They can sense the authority you walk with, the strength you've built, and the wisdom you've earned. And instead of acknowledging that, they shrink into pretending they don't get you. Your presence also disrupts illusions. People who survive on manipulation, gossip, control, or superficial confidence struggle around people who see through things quickly. You don't have to say much. You don't have to expose them. Your very existence makes their masks uncomfortable, and when people feel threatened in this way, they act confused, dismissive, or overly critical, anything that keeps them from admitting they're intimidated. Pretending not to understand you is a defense mechanism. It protects their pride. It shields their insecurities. It keeps them from facing the truth about themselves. But none of that has anything to do with you. It's never been about your clarity. It's been about their capacity. Once you see the weight your presence carries, you stop explaining yourself to people who are pretending not to understand. You start saving your energy for those who listen with openness, not resistance. And you finally accept that some people don't misunderstand you. They fear you. Number 4. If you saw the prophecy embedded in your life story, you'd realize explanations cheapen your path. There are people who look at their life as a straight line, point A to point B, things happening randomly, events unfolding by chance. But your life never worked like that. Nothing you've survived, learned, lost, or walked away from has been random. There's a deeper rhythm underneath your timeline that most people cannot recognize because they're only looking at the surface. You're not just living, you're unfolding. Every chapter has echoed something bigger than the moment itself, pointing you toward who you were destined to become long before you knew there was a destination. The things that broke you weren't failures, they were alignments. The people who left weren't losses, they were releases. The delays weren't punishments, they were protection. These aren't cute phrases, they're spiritual architecture. Your life has repeated certain themes, certain battles, certain awakenings, not because you're unlucky, but because you're being shaped for something that requires a different level of understanding. And if someone doesn't have that spiritual sensitivity, there's no amount of explaining that will ever make sense to them. People who can only comprehend life logically will always think your journey is dramatic, exaggerated, or too deep. They don't understand that some people are born to live stories that carry messages. Some people walk through things that are meant to wake others up. Some people go through spiritual pruning, spiritual stretching, and spiritual rebuilding because their lives will eventually serve as evidence for something bigger. That's not everyone's path, and that's exactly why not everyone can understand yours.